All right, we are talking about employee rights and responsibilities. This is it's a concept, somewhat in philosophy, that these things are bundled, right? So you have a right to drive on the road. You have a responsibility to drive safely and within the laws. You have a right to use a public restroom. You have a responsibility not to vandalize public restroom. If you don't fulfill your responsibilities, then you lose your rights, right? So they're bundled together. Employees typically, it's just all of us are self-determined and self-interested. Employees typically like to advocate their rights, minimize their responsibilities, in a conflict anyway. And organizations typically like to advocate for the employee had a responsibility, and rather than employer's own responsibility to take care of them, minimizing their rights. So they're bundled together. We can get to some tension, so we'll talk about kind of some, investigations, employee discipline, stuff like that. So when we think like kind of the HR cop, which we don't talk about a whole lot in here, it's not an effective mindset for an HR professional, but it is part of our jobs. Part of a manager's job. When there's an employee who's doing something wrong, then you have to deal with that. So pretty broad concept. We'll start getting into it. Rights are power, privileges, or interest given by nature or tradition or law. So you might think kind of founding documents for the United States. Human beings have been endowed by their creator and have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So there's an idea there that from outside the self, rights are derived from somewhere. So it's a broad word. Statutory rights, those are rights that you have based on a specific law. You have a right to a minimum wage. You have a right to a safe work environment. You have a right to collectively bargain, stuff like that. The right not to be retaliated against. Those are laws that are written that provide rights for people. Responsibilities, pretty obvious with that. Things that we need to do in response to those rights. And if I don't do my responsibilities, I lose my rights. Some other ones, contractual rights. So if there's a specific contract, like I think like an employment contract, a collective bargaining agreement is a labor contract between a union and its members and the organization. Or a professional athlete will have a specific employment contract that will afford a different set of rights, of course, and a different set of responsibilities. You can have a no-compete agreement. Have people sign when they show up. It means if you want this job, that means you can't go to one of our competitors for whatever it is, 1 year, 3 years, something like that. You also have some rights around your intellectual property. So if you are at company A and you know that can really benefit company B, if you go over there and bring the trade secrets, then you may go to jail. You'll certainly be prosecuted. The organization has a right to retain that intellectual property. This one's interesting. We talked about a psychological contract already, but there's a thing called an implied contract. So 3 different ways that contracts usually happen. The most common is, of course, a written contract. You do this, you get this, here's our deal. The next one is a verbal contract. I live in Ellensburg, Washington. It has a strong kind of Western, almost like a kind of a cowboy or farmer tradition. And so a lot of the organizations will market themselves as something like where a handshake still means something or something like that. Well, that's not a written contract, that's a verbal contract. Is it enforceable in court? Yes, absolutely, it's enforceable in court. It's more difficult to prove than having the paper trail, the written contract, but it is enforceable in court. The other one that gets people caught up sometimes is an implied contract. It means I didn't actually say it, but it was implied. So if I were to hire you and say, hey, like everybody who gets this job, if they have performance scores, on a scale of 1 to 5, above a 4 for 3 years, they always become a manager. That's just what happens. So just focus on your performance, and you'll do great. Well, let's say the 3rd year goes by and you get above a 4 on your performance every year, and I don't give you the job. And you can say, well, you told me I would have this job. And I say, no, I didn't. Well, the fact is I created an implied contract. I didn't say at 3 years or whatever it is, I will make you a manager. We said, this is what happens. And there was enough evidence there. If you can prove that, then you can take action on that in terms of breach of contract. So Well, with implied contracts, especially on the staffing function of HR, things around compensation, start time, pay, longevity, stuff like that, and managers and their day-to-day operations regarding promotion, we try to give a lot of training to staffing people and to line managers around not accidentally or purposely creating an implied contract. They can be prosecuted. They're difficult, but they can be. Okay, a few things that we want to unpack regarding their employment relationship, employment at will. I'm sure you've heard the term before. Different types of discharge and different ways we look at employee discipline. So let's get into it. Employment at will. It's a common law doctrine. What does it mean? It means there is no law that says employment at will. It's like it's almost like sexual harassment, right? It came from the Title VII laws. It was how the courts interpreted this law over time, providing some semblance of consistency. It became a common law doctrine. So here's what it says. Employers have the right to hire, fire, demote, promote, whatever they want. It's their business. As long as they're not breaking the law, as long as I'm not hiring you or firing you based on some other, protected class, whatever, breaking some law that I can do what I want. It's my business. And you will hear employers, organizations advocate for this often. Hey, it's employment at will. If I don't like that you're a Raiders fan, I can fire you, which might be a good reason if, no, I'm just kidding. But if I don't like you're a Raiders fan, I can fire you because being a Raiders fan isn't a protected class. I'm not breaking any laws right there, and it's my company. I can decide who works here. Okay? The flip side of that, employees have the right to quit, get another job. Same thing, no consequences to it. Employment at will, everybody kind of gets it. The challenge, of course, is that the entire thing is pretty much made up. So 1877 was the first time that we found this. This guy describes employment at will, cites a bunch of court cases. Nobody had their iPhones. Nobody had their Microsoft Surfaces out, so they couldn't check it. The fact is the court cases never actually existed and made the entire thing up and won the case. So you can see 10 years later, they started citing this employment at will doctrine. It's like everybody knows this. Duh, we all know this. So you can see it was one of those things that people like kind of thought or believed, but it was never actually done in terms of law. So now we have a weird situation where employers, organizations, and entrepreneurs and sole proprietors, they believe employment at will exists, but you have a government entity like the EEOC, for instance, that says that doesn't exist. Show me the law. So if I fire someone that's working for me because they're a Raiders fan, is that a protected category? No, it's not. And I would say it's employment at will. I can do that if I want to. The EEOC would say, no, you just took employment action. You have to have just cause to do it. And being a Raiders fan is not just cause. I mean, some people might think it's just cause, but you get the idea. It's not legally, anyway, just cause. As a reminder, union represented employees are not employment at will. Why is that? Because they are contract employees. They have a collective bargaining agreement or a labor contract. There are some exceptions to employment at will cases. Public policy, implied contract, talked about a little bit, and the idea of covenant of good faith and fair dealing. What do I mean by that? That means that if someone is on their way to work and they are CPR certified and they drive by a car accident and they pull over and they help somebody out, so they come into work late, and I say, well, you came into work late, I'm firing you. The United States, we go, no, you're not. Because we want the kind of person who would help somebody else. We don't want someone to be punished for that. Or if you get summoned for jury duty, you have to go to jury duty and they say, oh, job abandonment, you didn't show up, you're fired. We'd say, no, that's a public policy exception there. People need to be able to respond to things like jury duty or to go testify in court or something for the good of the community, for the good of the order. So there are some pretty significant exceptions to employment at will cases. The other one, the covenant of good faith and fair dealing, this one brought up this idea of wrongful discharge. So when we think about what are the things that keep kind of HR people up at night, what are we worried about? One of the things that we're worried about is firing someone for a reason that's either illegal or improper. Meaning, if you're at a big company and you're looking around going, this is so frustrating. I mean, these people here, I'm working with this person for 10 years and they're horrible at their job and they're always in trouble, and the company does not have the guts to actually just fire them. Like, this is ridiculous. This is the reason why the company doesn't have the guts. Wrongful discharge cases, when you fire somebody, it's got to be squeaky clean especially if you're a bigger company, because there's a team of lawyers who would love to take on a wrongful discharge case. So this case is actually pretty interesting. Fortune versus National Cash Register. Kind of a quick summary. Basically, this guy gets a bonus coming his way because he works all year and gets a commission bonus, if you will. So let's just go in theory. He works from January to November, and he has his big bonus coming in December, and the company fires him. And he says, well, you just fired me because you didn't want to pay that bonus. And the company doesn't necessarily admit it, but in a sense they say, so getting a bonus is not a protected category. There was no contract that said you got that bonus. We don't owe you that. The bonus is for if you're an employee at the time all year and you weren't an employee all year because we fired you. And he says, well, that's garbage. You fired me because you didn't want to pay me. And the company basically said, so what? So it goes up to, I believe it's the Ninth Court Circuit of Appeals. I have to double check that, in San Francisco, where the company said, hey, look, we fired this guy. Employment at will. We did not fire him for any illegal reason. There was no law. And the court basically said, good point. You're right. It wasn't illegal, but it should have been. It was improper. And so they ended up losing. And we came up with this idea. The court came up with this idea of a covenant, which means that like an agreement, a covenant of good faith and fair dealing. So it's not in every state, depends on where you are, but it's a good idea to keep in mind anyway for any organizations. Like the idea here, not just morally and ethically, but also legally, is that you deal with people in a fair way, right? This person works all year, going to get a bonus. You're not just going to fire them unless it was, coming to work and punch somebody out, something like that. But you're not going to fire them and withhold the bonus. So that's wrongful discharge. This is why it takes so long for companies to fire people, because almost always brings lawsuits, but the lawsuits don't have just back pay and reinstatement. It's not like, okay, we fired the person for an illegal reason, they can have their job back. It also carries what's called punitive damages, meaning punishment. So when you hear the Isaiah Thomas sexual harassment case, it was like $8 million, $8-something million, for when he was allegedly, no, he was, I guess, found sexually harassing this woman over a period of time. Was her job, was $8 million, was that for back pay? Is that how much she made? No, of course not. She's making like, I don't know, 150, 200 grand a year. But it was $8 million because it was punitive damages. It was punishment. So that's why people are afraid of wrongful discharge. Constructive discharge is an interesting one. Constructive discharge basically is when the organization or the manager, whatever, makes working conditions working there so horrible that somebody quits, then courts look at that as though they were terminated. So if I'm bullied and if I'm picked on and if my hours are cut and if I'm jerked around and treated horribly by my manager, so finally I'm like I'm out. Like they are trying to get me to quit, so fine, I'm going to quit. And then I go file for unemployment, and the company says, what do you mean unemployment? You quit. Well, actually no, I was fired. Even though I voluntarily resigned, it was because of this thing called constructive discharge. So the conversation comes up a lot, is constructive discharge illegal? Yeah, it depends on what was the underlying reason for it. If I'm picking on you nonstop because you're a Raiders fan and so you quit, is that constructive discharge? Yes. Is it illegal? Probably not. But if I'm making, sexist comments or sexual harassment or something so you quit, and that is constructive discharge, but the underlying reason behind it was gender related, or you can fill in the blank, right? Religion related, race related, stuff like that. Then yes, in that case, constructive discharge is illegal. So think of it as just another way of firing somebody, even though they voluntarily did it. It's another way of firing somebody. So if we are going to fire someone, how do we make sure that we don't get sued? So if you're a manager, inevitably you will encounter a situation where you're trying to fire someone and your boss or your HR person says not yet. Hopefully they won't say no or yes. Well, I could say yes, I guess, if you have it down, but the idea is not yet. We need to have a solid kind of bulletproof case. Here's what they're looking for. Number one, accurate performance evaluations. If I'm a manager and I say I want to fire John Doe over here, I mean, a good HR person will say, sweet, let's see the performance record. And the performance record says John Doe is a good employee, then I didn't do my job as a manager. Unless something switched quickly, in that case I need to document it. So the performance evaluations need to say they do a poor job. There needs to be good justification for it. Like, this is how we decide when to terminate somebody. The employee has a warning, means they have a chance to change their behavior. So this is your last 2 performance evaluations. If it doesn't change in the 3rd one, you're going to be fired. Grounds for dismissal. And a big one is involve more than one person. Otherwise, it can look like kind of, I guess the term is a witch hunt, where I really don't like this person working for me, and so I marked them low performance even though they weren't. I put in grounds for dismissal even though it was questionable, and I decided to fire them with no other accountability. So when you're going to fire someone, I like 3. I like the immediate supervisor, an HR person, and then that supervisor's supervisor. Doesn't mean you have to spend weeks on it together, but just another set of eyes looking at it and just going, does this make sense? Does it make sense with precedent? Do we fire people for stuff like this here? Then you should have a pretty solid case. This is when you're firing somebody for performance-related reasons. There's 2 other reasons why you might want to fire somebody. One is an ethics violation or a legal violation, and the other one is safety. Firing someone for performance, I don't find it fun. I think as a manager, there's something I could have done different. So you weigh that guilt. You're sending someone home without a paycheck. If you're violating someone for something unethical or unsafe, to me that's different. Somebody's driving a forklift recklessly, they're a good employee. No, they're gone. If it could kill somebody, hurt somebody, you're out of here. I don't need to have this same kind of document trail. Obviously, I need to document it. But they could be the best performer, but they embezzled money. They're gone. Okay, those are different. What we're talking about here is when we're firing someone for performance. This is kind of a process, and the documents you're going to want to walk through. And we think about this idea of both just cause and due process. Here's how they go together. Just cause is like, is this a fair response? If someone has been here for 5 years and they came in late, they're in the middle of March and their 5th year and they've never been late, I go, oh, that's it, you're late, you're fired. We might look at that and go, wait a second, like, that seems like a pretty egregious step, right, for someone who's been here for 5 years. I'm not sure there was just cause to take that egregious of a conclusion. Maybe like a coaching or even a written warning would have been more appropriate. So just cause is highly dependent on precedent, meaning, okay, employee did X. What did we do with the last employee that did X, and the one before that, and the one before that? That's probably what we're going to do, because that's what we've corporately agreed to. Is this is the process. This is the reasonable expectation for an employee who breaks whatever the rule is. That's just cause. Due process. This is something that you basically you give the person a chance for their defense. So I think of it like, you see people get arrested on TV. You have the right to remain silent. Everything you say can and will be used against you, blah, blah. You have a right to a defense, right? So you get to stand before a judge or a jury or whatever and give your side of the case. So if there's an allegation, okay, Jane Doe accuses John Doe of sexual harassment, we don't just go fire John Doe. We investigate. We go, John Doe, what happened? Tell us the story. Well, we went on a date and she kissed me and I said no. Okay, well, now this is going to turn into a pretty awkward investigation. Here we go. Due process just means like we're taking each step as objective as we can, as fair as we can, giving everybody kind of the presumption of innocence until the evidence leads us otherwise. Different types of justice. Talked about this a bit before, so I won't spend a lot of time on it, but procedural justice, it means that people have an expectation that they are entitled to know how a decision was made. So if I sit down with an employee and say, you came in late, you're fired, it might be like, well, how did you get there? Why is this fair? And if you can lay out your case, great. They may not like it, but in theory, people will at least accept the logic of it. So procedural justice is there fairness behind the procedures that were done? Were all these closed-door meetings? Was it made just by one person? Due process, did the person have a chance to explain their actions? Stuff like that. Distributive justice has to do with the fairness and the distribution of outcomes. So why is it that every woman who complains about sexual harassment ends up getting a job transfer, but if a man does, it doesn't? You go, well, we followed the procedures. Yeah, you can say what you want. It doesn't look fair. The outcomes here are not being passed out in a particular certain way. Last one here is interactional justice. And that is just kind of the dignity and respect throughout the process. Whether the person is, the accused or the accuser. It's on us, and this is tough. Like, this sounds really easy as we look at our PowerPoint slide, but when you get someone who's just, maybe they're a bad employee and they're just a dirtbag and they treat people horribly and you don't like them, treating them with dignity and the presumption of innocence and respect throughout the entire process can be taxing, especially if they haven't earned that. And we do it anyway as a matter of fairness. So whistleblowers. Somebody says so-and-so is stealing money, or so-and-so is acting unethical, or this is an unsafe work environment, or I was sexually harassed, whatever, going to a lawyer, whatever it is. How do we deal with that? There's a few laws around. There's a principle that you don't retaliate against whistleblowers, but a couple of specific laws. If the company is guilty of retaliation, this is a minimum. The person will get their job back. They'll be provided back pay or double back pay, and cover any costs associated with their legal counsel. And the fourth bullet point that's not there, because it doesn't always happen, is, as I mentioned earlier, punitive damages. If you retaliate against somebody, chances are you're going to pay through the nose for it. This is, I'm imagining a situation where an employee accuses a manager of sexual harassment, and there is an investigation and found out, no, that didn't happen. Manager's exonerated. This person still works for this manager. This manager's had their reputation trashed, their name dragged through the mud. To think the manager isn't going to be motivated to retaliate is crazy, right? It's just human nature. So a lot of times, well, okay, what we should do here is move this person to a different area. Guess what? You just retaliated. The person made a complaint, so you transferred their job. So what do we do? Leave them there? These are the tough situations, but we have to keep in mind that a manager, whoever is accused, especially if they're exonerated, they're going to want to retaliate. So we spend a lot of time training managers on what retaliation looks like. So when we investigate, do it quickly. Do it thoroughly and comprehensively, but do it quickly. Remember, when we're hiring someone, we don't only look at their resume or only look at an interview. We use different types of information and different sources of information. We do reference checks. We ask coworkers, right? We talk to the person themselves. We look at resumes. Maybe we look at LinkedIn. We're looking at different types of information. It's the same thing. We don't just get two statements and say we're done here. So we go comprehensive, but we wanna move quickly. Part of that is for the dignity of the individuals, and part of it is for accuracy in the investigation itself. Why can't we just sit everybody down and just put them on a polygraph and find out what really happened? Polygraphs don't work like that. They're not perfectly reliable. And also B, there's a thing called an Employee Polygraph Protection Act. That in most cases we can't force employees to take a polygraph. They may do it voluntarily, but these would be only used in extreme cases, right? Like large-scale embezzlement or crime at work, stuff like that. Just a heads up, in case you're going into like armed forces or police, stuff like that, you will have a polygraph as part of the selection process at that point. Okay, so let's talk again about drugs. Talked a little bit about it in the safety chapter, but let's hit it again here. 70% of people who use drugs illegally are employed, which is pretty incredible. So there's a lot of laws around that. So the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, for instance, says that if someone is a recovering substance abuser, recovering substance user or abuser, then that is a disability recognized by the ADA. So let's say I used to be addicted to cocaine. I don't do cocaine anymore, but I go to a Cocaine Anonymous group once a week on Wednesdays at 2 o'clock to go meet my sponsor and go hang out with my, I don't know the terminology, partners, whatever, people. If I do that and the company says, well, you have to be here at 2 o'clock, that's actually a disability recognized by the ADA. And going to that 1 hour meeting on Wednesday at 2 o'clock, if it can be done, that would be a reasonable accommodation. So we accommodate that. Now, if I actually go and use cocaine again, then you can fire me. I mean, that's different. Having a disability is not a defense of using illegal drugs. That's under the ADA. Drug-Free Workplace Act in 1988. This happened back in kind of the war on drugs years. This is the idea that if you're getting money from the federal government, you need to take actions to make sure as much as possible that your workplace is drug-free. You will create a plan and a document to do so if you'd like to have those contracts. So let's talk about marijuana really quick. In Washington State, as a professor in HR, this comes up a lot. I get phone calls that say, I failed the drug test. They didn't give me the job. It was marijuana. That's not fair because marijuana is legal. I'm going to sue them. And I think if you would have had my HR 381 class, you'd have known that you're not going to go sue them. So there are several states now and more adopting. We'll see what happens at a federal level for recreational use of marijuana, the active drugs, THC. So I put this really beautiful little graph Venn diagram here, which is actually not that beautiful or useful. But let me explain this really quick. So you see the little yellow thing there. It says horrible, costly, violent, stealing, unhealthy employees. So these are people that you don't want anywhere. You don't want them around your kids. You don't want them around your family. You'll visit them in jail and bring them Starbucks and wish them well. But they're people you don't want to be around. You certainly don't want to be employing. They're expensive. They steal. They're violent, etc., etc. So am I putting a label on employees? I don't know. Maybe. I just know that I've worked with a few of them. On average, those people tend to smoke weed. Now look at all of the blue. Look at all of the blue. Those are really good accountants and engineers and people that work at organizations that hold down jobs and pay their bills and pay their taxes, and they don't speed, and they always wear their seatbelt, and they don't talk on the phone while they're driving. These are like just good citizens, right? These are your neighbors. These are you, right? People that just great, productive people. My deal on hiring for my company, Amazon, is I want to make sure that I don't find that person. I want to make sure that I don't accidentally hire the person I want to make sure I don't hire. How do I do that? I'll test for weed. I will lose a lot of really good employees. I know that, but I'm willing to roll the dice on that to make sure that I don't get any of those other horrible employees. So people would say, yeah, I smoke weed on the weekend, but it doesn't affect me at work. Well, that's okay, but the people that it does affect at work also smoked weed on the weekends. That's how we found them, and that's why we're not going to hire you or them. So that's the first logic, okay? And that's just straight data and statistics, and we can say fair, not fair all day, but that is what it is. The second logic has to do with liability. So if I give you a drug test and you fail a drug test and I hire you, and then you go drive that FedEx truck into a bunch of kids on a playground, I knew or should have known that you could have been under the influence of marijuana. And you go, oh, well, it doesn't work like that, James. Tell that to the jury. Tell that to the parents. No, it's not going to fly. So you have not only a moral and ethical component, of course, regarding safety, but you also have a legal component now where I knew or should have known this person had, in this case, mind-altering substances, which so is caffeine, I get it, but mind-altering substances in their body, in their biology, and I let them go to work. So, in case question comes up, in case you've always wondered, if it's legal in Washington, how is it that firms can still test for it and not hire you or fire you? They can have their own zero-tolerance policy, and they can enforce it. Okay, conducting drug tests. Here's the big here's the big idea regarding conducting drug tests. It's number one, when the test, when job consequences outweigh privacy concerns. So I'll give you like kind of my opinion. This isn't fact. So do we need to go through the Department of Psychology at my university and test every single psych professor to make sure there's no marijuana in it? Probably not, right? It probably is not going to mess up their jobs. That's not going to be a big deal. What about pilots? Yeah, we're going to test pilots and truck drivers and forklift drivers and people that operate complex lethal machinery. Or how about people that are designing and manufacturing weapons or even weapons of war? Yes, we're going to test you. Oh, but I smoked weed on Friday. I'm okay on Monday. I don't give a crap. No, the job consequences, what you do, it far outweighs your concern about, oh, stay out of my weekend organization. So that's when we do it. As a company, do we want a culture of going around and giving your analysis at random just so we can find out who the bad person is? Probably not. It's probably not what you want to do. If you're in a warehouse with a high incident rate of accidents, yes, that probably is what you want to do. So it really boils down to job consequences and also liability. Did you know or should have known, especially in the case of an accident or a problem? If somebody is tested positive, give them a second. If they say, no, I promise I didn't, it was poppy seed muffins, blah, 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 whatever. Let a week go by, not at work, they stay home, and let them test again. If they fail again, then they failed. Second one you can make them pay for if you like to. The first one you pay for as your organization. So employer, the very bottom one, has a drug program included in an EAP. So there's two different kind of perspectives here. One of them is we had a rule that said no illicit drugs. We found cocaine in your system. You're fired out on the streets. Maybe, maybe that's fair. Maybe that's just. But the idea is, like, is it right? Is it right by the employee? Is it right by society? So this is, if you can, and my recommendation is try to make it so you can, help them out. They were there. You have an EAP. A lot of firms have EAP is Employee Assistance Program. That is, no, you can't come back to work here. We're not going to pay you, but we have thrown this little bit of money off to the side called an EAP. If you go there, help you out, maybe rehab, get clean, come back, re-interview, retest. We'll put you on a probationary period where we're testing you every few weeks, whatever. Kind of give them a chance, give them something to look forward to earn their spot back. The recovery rates in those situations for people, I think everybody, I have like faces, including family members in my head who I know and who I love, and I'm sure everybody has those stories of who gave that person a chance, like who gave them a little bit of hope to get back on their feet. Oftentimes it's the company. It's a great thing to do if we can and are willing to do that. So again, policies: test after accidents. You can test on random and reasonable suspicion. Those are kind of the three main things. Other than Department of Transportation, you're going to have more frequent intervals. The big thing on when you're testing, doing drug testing in the workplace, is employees have to know, not when it's going to happen. Surprise tests are the most accurate, but they have to know that it could happen at any moment. So that needs to be in the employee handbook, and they need to see it. Santa Claus, I just wrote a handbook for a company, and there's a page on there that says, I recognize at any moment, this could happen. Sign off so everybody knows it's going to happen. Because otherwise you say, well, how was I supposed to know? That's not fair. If you can tell them in advance, you win. Oh, we got this. Okay, employee handbook, as I said, essential policies, procedures. Make sure it's written such that, like when I write a handbook for a firm, if I'm consulting with them, I will say, give me the average reading level of employees at your company. It needs to be able to be understood by everybody. Whenever lawyers write employee handbooks, you just read it and be like, who's going to even understand this? Are you kidding me? So it needs to be kind of digestible by all employees who are there. Employee discipline. Boy, this is fun. We focus on behaviors and results, not on traits. So we're not disciplining an employee because they're a dirtbag. We're disciplining an employee because they engage in sexual harassment. So we focus on dealing with behaviors, not necessarily dealing with individuals, assaulting identities, stuff like that. These are we call it progressive discipline, right? You have some different tools in your toolbox: counseling, written documentation, all the way up to termination. It usually goes something like this. First offense, verbal warning. Second offense, written warning. Third offense, suspension, and you're about to lose your job. Fourth offense, you're out. This is another reason why it takes so long to do it. Now, there's some complexities in this. If the first offense is I brought a knife to work and stabbed somebody, it's not a verbal caution. They're gone. They need to be gone. If you keep them there, that's a thing called negligent retention. It means you kept somebody that you should have fired. You don't want to do that. So it depends on the degree of whatever the offense is and the category of it. One of the extremely frustrating things for managers is when a policy is written like this, and the first offense, someone came in late. Second offense, they came in late. Third offense, they came in late. And the fourth offense was they parked in the wrong spot. They parked in disabled parking. Or they came in on time, but they shoved another employee. Okay, now we're on, let's see, the third offense for coming in late, but the first offense for shove. It's like, how many of these rules do we have to get down before we say this is ridiculous? You can actually write your policy to account for that. One of the mistakes that I think a lot of policies have is they say each type of offense we follow this process. It doesn't have to be that way. Whatever your policy is, stick to it. You say the first offense you came in late, the second offense you shoved somebody, and the third offense you punched somebody, you're gone. so they can stack if you'd like them to. All right, some challenges. At will employment. Do you have to discipline somebody? No, you don't have to discipline them. You can just fire them, although better to give them a chance, I think. And another challenge is the kind of fairness and consistency. That is, what have we done before, and are we treating the situation any different? Kind of called precedent. Fairness also has to do with the idea of just cause. This is a reasonable reaction. Third point, documentation problems. This is, we tell managers over and over, document, 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 to the point where I had a presentation, what was she? General counsel. It had a presentation by this lawyer who basically said, managers, I know we tell you to document all the time, but can you please stop documenting? Because you're creating a subpoenaable document, and what you say in that document, rather than helping, comes back to hurt. So here would be an example. A manager would say, okay, this employee going through performance issue or behavioral issue, and you want to terminate them, well, you're going to need to have a paper trail that shows it's consistent, it's egregious, etc. So you get a bunch of emails from the manager that says, this is the worst employee, I can't stand them, can't wait for them to be gone. They do horrible work all the time, just unbelievable stuff, very affective, kind of passion-oriented stuff. And then the manager, of course, loses credibility in front of a judge or a jury. So do we need to document this? Yes, we have to document what the employee did, what we said, when it happened, what the consequences were, but it needs to be done like a freaking robot, not full of, I can't stand this person. It needs to be, here's the policy, here was the violation of the policy, here's when we had the conversation with the employee, here were the consequences. Okay, next piece of paper, we keep going. A big one, again, is reluctance to discipline. And this is where I think if you want to be excellent in terms of HR, we have to keep a couple things in mind. Biggest one that I've seen, I think, is, I've underlined it there. Sometimes the culture doesn't support it, guilt, time loss, etc. It's a hassle to discipline employees. That's true. But we get this idea that HR people, so let's say I've got 30 managers that I support, and each of them have 15 employees. Let's just go with that. Those managers work with those employees often for year after year after year, certainly month after month. Families know each other, they've shared inside jokes together, etc. And now we're to a point where there's going to be discipline. It costs me as an HR person, it costs me nothing to say, here's the plan, go have the conversation with the employee as their direct manager, I'll be there if you want me to, and the consequence, the next one is suspension, and after that is termination, and they need to know that. And my manager hangs his or her head low and walks out of my office sad. Why? Because it's going to cost them something. Not just time and reputation, it's going to cost them a relationship. I can't sit down with a friend and say, if you don't do better at your job, I'm going to fire you, and then be like, next year, oh yeah, we're all just hanging out together playing a baseball, softball game. No, we're not. It's different. So it doesn't mean don't do it. We have to do it. But as an HR person, I think that's where we engage and go like, how do we support you? Is there a way we can make this better where it doesn't, hurt the relationship so much, but we can stick to what needs to be done in terms of the organizational objectives. Finally, if it ends up going down this route in termination, you fire someone, do it quickly. Don't let someone languish in the job, but don't do it so quickly that you overlook important details. You want to state it clearly and firmly when you sit down with them. You don't sit down and go, well, it kind of looks like we might be moving toward, looking for new opportunities. No. You're fired. It's effective on Friday, or we're ending or you're going to resign, or whatever you want to call it. But like we're done here, effective this day. Here are your benefits. Here's some paperwork on the way out the door, etc. Got to be quick, because otherwise you get pushed back and it turns into an argument. Never bring up anything new. Like you're terminated for this and this and this reason. And the employee's like, what are you talking about? It's only been one thing. What were those other two? And then you start from scratch. Make it clear. Don't bring up anything new. If you want, sometimes we'll do a separation agreement. This is in exchange for severance pay. You're going to basically sign this paper. It's a waiver of a right to sue. And the employee will say, well, what would I sue for? Probably, hopefully nothing. But just in case you try to come up with something, you're going to sign this paper if you want this severance package. So, fun stuff. In some ways, like partnering with managers and helping employees who've had a setback and can move through it, but inevitably terminations happen, and I don't know any people that take great joy in them. They're not fun, but they are part of the business and occasionally need to be done.